Hey everyone, welcome back. So today we're diving into something a little different, something you actually sent to us,
Oh, yeah.
a scientific paper all about xylazine.
Xylazine.
You
What
know,
about it?
it's been making headlines lately. They're calling it the zombie drug.
Yeah,
I have to admit, even I was a little freaked out when I started reading about it.
I can imagine.
So
Yeah.
let's break this down together and figure out what makes this drug so disturbing.
Well, to start, it's actually pretty interesting because xylazine was never, ever intended for human use.
Oh, really?
Nope. It's a powerful anesthetic, actually primarily used by vets.
Vets.
Yeah, large animal vets.
So we're talking like horses and cows.
Exactly. Horses, cows, the big ones,
Okay, so it's like a super strong sedative then.
basically. Yeah,
But that paper mentions it's being found more and more in illegal drug markets,
that's right.
like mixed with fentanyl.
Yeah, that's a really alarming trend that we're seeing, and it kind of highlights a big problem with how we handle drugs.
What do you mean? Well, we put so much focus on fentanyl, controlling it, which is important, but then other dangerous drugs like xylazine slip through the cracks.
Okay, that makes sense. So how does this stuff even work?
Yeah.
The paper mentions something about alpha-2 adrenergic receptors.
It's a mouthful, right? So basically, xylazine is what we call an alpha-2 adrenergic agonist.
Okay.
And when it gets into your body, it activates those receptors
Uh-huh.
in the brain and spinal cord, and that actually blocks the release of norepinephrine.
Norepinephrine, what is that?
It's a neurotransmitter, one of the big ones. It's kind of what drives our fight or flight response.
Oh, wow. So it basically shuts down the body's natural alarm system.
Pretty much, yeah. And that's exactly why it's used to tranquilize big animals.
It makes them super chill.
Exactly. It sedates them and relieves pain, which are good things when you're a vet.
Yeah,
But you can imagine those same effects can be really dangerous for humans,
especially if they don't know they're taking it.
especially if they don't know. Yeah, and the paper didn't hold back on the side effects. We're talking skin ulcers, abscesses,
Yep.
even tissue death.
It
It sounds like something out of a horror movie.
It's grim. It really is. And the worst part is xylazine can actually cause tissue damage so severe it can lead to necrosis.
Necrosis. Isn't that just a fancy way of saying rotting flesh?
It is.
I'm starting to see where that whole zombie drug nickname comes from.
Yeah, I mean, it's a gruesome comparison, but it's not that far off.
Ugh.
There was this one case study in the paper about a woman whose hand felt like it was generating heat because the tissue damage was so bad.
I remember that part. It's just disturbing to think about people going through that much pain and suffering.
It really is. And it gets even scarier when you consider the fentanyl that's already mixed into a lot of the drug supply.
Right.
Fentanyl slows your heart rate and breathing way down. And xylazine does the same thing. So you put them together and the risk of overdose skyrockets.
And the tissue damage.
And the tissue damage, exactly.
I also read that naloxone, the medication that reverses opioid overdoses, doesn't work on xylazine.
That's right.
So if someone overdoses on a mix, it's even harder to save them.
It is a lot harder.
Yeah.
It makes responding to these overdoses way more complex.
So we've got this incredibly dangerous drug causing all these horrible side effects mixed in with other drugs without people even knowing. That's a nightmare scenario.
It is a nightmare scenario. And the scariest thing is, so many people probably have no idea they're even taking xylazine.
Right.
It gets mixed in disguise, so you just don't know what you're getting.
That's terrifying. It feels like every time we figure out one dangerous drug, there's another one waiting to take its place.
It does feel like an uphill battle sometimes.
It does.
But that's why research and awareness are so important. The more we know about xylazine, the better we can deal with it.
Speaking of dealing with it, the paper mentions there aren't any FDA-approved meds to treat xylazine overdoses.
Right.
Or to help with withdrawal.
Unfortunately not.
That doesn't sound very hopeful.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
It's really tough because right now, all we can do is offer supportive care.
What does that mean exactly?
Well, things like making sure they can breathe, giving them fluids, keeping an eye on their vital signs.
So basically keeping them alive until their body clears the drug.
Exactly.
It sounds like we desperately need more research into treatments that actually target xylazine.
We absolutely do.
I remember reading about a couple potential reversal agents,
Yeah.
atipamezole and tolazoline, but the paper didn't go into much detail.
Okay, so atipamezole is interesting because vets already use it to reverse xylazine in animals.
Oh, so it was like doggy naloxone.
Kinda, yeah. And there's some evidence it might work in humans too, but we need more research to figure out the right dose and make sure it's safe.
And what about tolazoline?
So tolazoline has also been shown to block some of xylazine's effects.
Okay.
But again, more research is needed before we can use it as a treatment.
So we're still in the early stages of figuring out how to treat xylazine overdose and addiction. What about harm reduction? Can we do anything to reduce the risks associated with this drug?
Harm reduction is absolutely crucial, especially with something as dangerous and unpredictable as xylazine.
So what kinds of harm reduction strategies are we talking about?
Well, education's a big one. We need to make sure people understand the real dangers of xylazine.
Right, because a lot of people might be taking it without even knowing.
Exactly. And that knowledge could be the difference between life and death.
What else can we do?
Given the horrible skin lesions and infections, xylazine causes wound care, and clean injection supplies are also really important.
So sterile needles and teaching people how to care for their injection sites.
Exactly. We can significantly reduce the risk of abscesses and tissue death that way.
And wouldn't safe injection sites be a good idea too? Places where people can use drugs under medical supervision?
They would be incredible. It's a controlled environment, so you reduce the risk of overdose, and there are medical professionals right there if anything goes wrong.
It seems like a much more humane approach than just telling people to stop using.
It is harm reduction acknowledges that addiction is a complex issue and that people need support, not judgment.
So we've talked about treatment, harm reduction awareness, but it feels like there's a bigger picture here, a bigger reason why xylazine is becoming such a problem. What are your thoughts on that?
You're hitting on a really important point. If we look at xylazine within the context of the whole opioid epidemic, it represents a terrifying new chapter.
It does.
And to understand why this is happening, we need to understand the root causes of drug use.
So things like poverty, lack of access to health care, mental health trauma.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those are the issues that are fueling this crisis, and until we address them, we'll keep seeing new and even more dangerous drugs emerge.
It's like we're trying to put out a fire by only focusing on the flames while ignoring the fuel that's feeding it.
You said it perfectly. We need to tackle the root causes, the social and economic factors that drives people to use drugs in the first place.
So investing in community programs, affordable housing, healthcare, addressing inequality.
Precisely. Those are the long-term solutions that will actually make a difference.
The paper also mentioned that xylazine is sometimes used to cut fentanyl or heroin.
Oh, yeah.
Why would someone do that?
It all comes down to profit. Unfortunately, in the illicit drug market, profit often trumps safety. Xylazine is cheap and easy to get, so mixing it in allows dealers to make more money.
While making the drug even more dangerous.
Exactly. It's a horrible situation, and the fact that xylazine isn't even classified as a controlled substance in many countries makes it that much easier to get away with.
So easier access, less oversight, more risk to users.
It's a recipe for disaster.
It really is. And the lack of regulation makes it harder to track and control the spread of xylazine, too.
You're absolutely right. We're playing catch-up, and that's why we need stricter regulations, more research, and a more proactive approach to drug policy.
We need to tackle both the supply and the demand.
Exactly.
The paper also talked about how xylazine is made, and I was surprised to learn that it's not that complicated.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's part of the reason it's so readily available. The chemicals you need are easy to get, and the process itself isn't too complex.
So it's easy to make and not even classified as a controlled substance in many places. That's not a good combination.
No, it's not. If we want to solve this problem, we need to address those factors as well.
This has been really informative, but I have to admit I'm feeling a little discouraged. It's hard to stay optimistic when you see the devastation xylazine is causing.
I understand. It can be overwhelming. But it's important to remember that we can all do something.
What can we do?
Even small actions can make a difference. We can educate ourselves, talk to our friends and family support, harm reduction organizations, contact our elected officials.
So we can't just give up.
Absolutely not. We have to keep fighting for better policies, more research and support for those who are struggling.
And we need to change how we talk about drug use.
Exactly. It's a health issue, not a moral failing.
Yeah.
People who use drugs deserve our compassion and support.
Well said. This has been a real eye-opener. Thank you for helping us make sense of this complex and scary issue.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, knowledge is power. The more we know about xylazine, the better equipped we'll be to advocate for change.
And hopefully prevent this crisis from getting even worse.
Exactly.
We've talked about how awful the immediate dangers of xylazine are, but the paper also mentions some long-term effects.
Right.
And some of those were really scary, like cognitive impairment and even personality changes.
Yeah, that's a big concern.
Especially for people who are already dealing with addiction.
It is. We know that xylazine messes with neurotransmitters like norepinephrine and dopamine.
Right.
And those are super important for things like mood motivation and just how our brains work.
So if you're exposed to the drug for a long time, it could actually cause brain damage.
It's a real possibility, and it makes recovery so much harder.
On top of everything else we've talked about, it's just heartbreaking.
It is, and it shows why we need more research into the long-term effects of xylazine on the brain. We need to understand the full extent of the damage so we can help people.
It makes you wonder about the future.
Yeah.
If xylazine is this easy to get, this easy to make, and not even controlled in lots of places, is it just a matter of time before it becomes even more widespread?
It's a valid concern, and honestly, the trends are already worrying.
They are.
If we don't do something about xylazine, now it could easily turn into an even bigger public health crisis.
So what can we do? It all feels so overwhelming.
No, but we can't give up.
Yeah.
We have to remember that even small things can make a difference.
Like what?
We can educate ourselves and the people we care about the dangers of xylazine. We can support harm reduction organizations that are out there saving lives right now.
Yeah.
We can contact our elected officials and tell them this is important.
You're right. We can't just sit back and do nothing. We have to keep fighting for change, keep demanding more research, and keep supporting the people who are on the front lines of this crisis.
Exactly. And we need to change the way we talk about drug use.
How so?
It needs to be about compassion and understanding, not judgment and stigma. Addiction is a health problem, not a moral failing, and people who use drugs deserve our support.
That's a really important point. Well, this has been an eye-opening deep dive, to say the least. Thank you for helping us make sense of this incredibly complicated and honestly really terrifying topic.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, knowledge is power. The more we know about xylazine, the better we can fight for change.
And hopefully stop this crisis from getting any worse. So on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks as always to you for listening and for sending us this paper and sharing your curiosity with us. If you're feeling concerned after this conversation, please remember there are resources available to help. And if you feel inspired to take action, there are so many ways to get involved in fighting the opioid epidemic. Stay informed, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay hopeful.
Until next time.